Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hanson, and today we're talking to Matt Leacock. With the interview show overall, we're looking to learn a couple things from some smart people, and Matt is certainly smart. He is the designer of Pandemic, the incredibly popular co-op tabletop game, also Forbidden Island, and a bunch of other games as well. And so we talked to Matt about being the designer of Pandemic and how that has affected his life during a real pandemic. And also he offers a lot of great advice for tabletop designers that are up and coming. So if you're interested in designing a tabletop game of your own, you just want to learn what that experience is like, how the whole industry operates, we hope you enjoy the interview. If you're watching this on YouTube and you'd like to unlock the podcast version, you can support us at patreon.com/MinnMax, 2 N's at the $5 tier. Then you get access to all of the audio versions, podcast versions of our interviews in the past, moving into the future. Also, The Deepest Dive, which is our huge game club discussions, early access to the MinnMax show, access to the exclusive weekly podcast called MinnFacts, a lot of good stuff. And if you enjoy this interview, any help sharing the word would be appreciated. So without further ado, here's Matt Leacock. Matt Leacock, welcome to MinnMax, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you. I think a lot of people are wondering what your life is like these days. Take us inside the world for the creator of Pandemic during a pandemic.
Well, this is the large part of my world right here. This is my home office.
It's really wonderful. You have the whole world behind you. It's really out of this world.
Here. Yeah. That's actually a pandemic map you can play the game on. It's a plush globe. Anyway,
fun.
Things haven't changed a whole lot for me, honestly. I work from home, out of the house, so I feel like I'm kind of one of the lucky ones right now in that I can keep plugging away, and a lot of the meetings I have are online. So
yeah. Okay, walk us through the history of this current pandemic. At what point do people start tweeting at you, writing you, calling you, saying, "Hey, good job, Matt, ha ha ha," and those jokes?
Oh yeah, immediately.
Yeah. So even like before COVID was a pandemic, when he was just like, "Hey, this looks like some serious stuff," and then people immediately were like, "Hey, Matt, don't let it become a pandemic." Blah blah blah.
Yeah, there's a pretty active community, the player community, and they're pretty vocal. So when they see things in the news, it's the first thing that comes to mind, I think.
Is it a weird feeling when it's such a tragic time for the world for people to be reaching out about the game? Like, how does it make you feel when everyone is connecting your game to this tragedy?
Oh yeah, it's been a real roller coaster, to be sure. It's just an odd thing. I mean, when I designed the game, this is well over 10 years ago, pandemics were like this. So, something that would happen somewhere someday to someone,
right?
But never really. It became really, really real to us very, very quickly. My wife, in fact, actually came down with COVID very early on, and we had that whole roller coaster, and it was very. She's fine, by the way,
okay.
But it was just a very strange thing to kind of go through.
Yeah. How many people do reach out to you then? What is the number one response for people reaching out to you during this time?
People kind of break into two camps. Either, they don't want anything to do with the game, and you want to avoid it because they're living it in, day to day, or they turn to it because it's in the news and it's topical. What I hear from some people is that it's a way for them to process what's going on, or it's a way for them to kind of fight back against the disease.
Yeah, I've been going through Pandemic Legacy with my girlfriend, and that is the overwhelming sensation. It's like, it's nice to have some power. It's an illusion, as I'm sure you're aware, but still that idea of like, okay, you know what, we can cure a couple things. There's going to be some missteps along the way, and we're going to be stressed out, but in the end, I have a feeling we're going to win this thing, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So overall, you think it's still a decent time to continue playing the game? You don't think people will be too bummed out overall?
For it, by all means, knock yourself out. I don't want to push the game on anybody right now. I want to be sensitive to where people's heads are at this moment. But yeah, I mean, it does give you a chance to kind of fight back against the thing, and it is kind of promotes a message of everybody working together to beat an enemy or a foe that's bigger than themselves.
Right. What do you think about the state of the tabletop industry overall this year so far?
I don't feel like a real deep insider. I mean, I've got a couple data points. I mean, I heard that Hasbro released really good numbers for the first quarter. So I see that. But then on the other side, I see, convention after convention getting canceled. So that's going on. And so there's all these marketing opportunities and these abilities the ability for all the players to get together and the industry to get together at these conventions has been severely affected. So I don't know how it's going to play out. Honestly, it's just going to be very different. Like everything's going to be different.
Has it affected you as a designer? Have you slowed things down, sped things up in any way?
Things are pretty much the same. I know that some of the manufacturing is slowed down a little bit in China, but not nearly as much as I would have thought. I think distribution and retail, especially. Again, I'm not any kind of like, I don't have any deep insight about this, but I'm thinking, game, friendly little game stores, your neighborhood game shop is usually running on pretty tight margins as it is, and given this situation now, I think it's going to be extremely hard for them.
Yeah, it's a good time to go out and buy a gift certificate. I guess is kind of the least you could do, just to cash in for yourself later.
If they do curbside pickup, anything you can do to kind of throw them some help, I think would be great.
Yeah. What do you think about Tabletop Simulator on Steam? Do you check that out? Do you think it's hurting the industry overall?
I have been trying to get it to run on my Mac for a month now. I've gone through all the different Steam's troubleshooting guides and everything. Ever since I upgraded the operating system, it's just been a nightmare for me trying to get the thing run. So I have not been in there. I end up doing a lot of playtesting the way I always have, which is remote playtesting with video.
Yeah.
So that hasn't been disrupted. But I would like to play in this environment that everybody seems to be, having fun with.
Yeah. So it's not the bane of your existence, the idea that people are probably playing a hell of a lot of Pandemic on Tabletop Simulator now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they can, it'd be great. You can try it on iOS and Android too. But if you can't get a copy and you want to play it on simulator, or you can't get together with friends, it makes total sense to me to do that.
For sure. Do you play video games in general?
I've been playing a bunch on I got a new iPad, so I've been playing some games, generally like electronic versions of board games, just because I can't get together with people.
Right.
So most of the video games I play are ports of board games. I don't play a whole lot of video games because I generally I play games mostly for the social experience. Yeah.
And even going back to your youth, video games were never a huge part of it?
Not a huge part, no. Now, I had a little stint with Halo, 20 years ago, where I'd get together with coworkers at work and we play, but no serious, not a heavy-duty video game player. That would be my daughter Anna is doing that. She's a video gamer amongst the family.
I imagine she's into Fortnite.
She's really into Minecraft at this point.
Oh, okay, good.
Minecraft.
You have a smart daughter. Way to go. Well done. What do you think brought you on the track of tabletop games being your passion over video games? Like, what do you think it was at a young age where you chose, not that it has to be an either or, but it's interesting that you're like, I'm all in on this thing and not this thing?
Well, I've just been all in on board games since I was really young. It was something that I just got into with family. My dad and my uncle brought me into that world, and we went into pretty sophisticated hobby games fairly early on. And I just loved designing them, and I was just all in on that. So I enjoy video games, but frankly, I was working in industry. I was working on user experience design in Silicon Valley. So, I would spend 8-10 hours in front of the computer all day, and I just didn't want to turn to a screen for release. I'd rather get together with people across the table.
Yeah, absolutely. What was that moment when you realized that you could design tabletop games? Was it pretty early on when you were playing them where you thought, well, I could make this thing?
Yeah, I think my favorite gift as a kid for a birthday party, for example, would be the board game. You get the thing, it would be wrapped, and you could shake it. And you'd know this is a game, and it'd be all this anticipation and excitement. And then you'd unwrap it and you'd see it, and then there's this curve of disappointment that always came about because you'd read the rules and play it, and none of the games ever lived up to my expectations. And so early on, I spent a lot of time taking games and modding them or trying to come up with something better on the back. And I got really into that, just trying to cook up my own games, and then gradually kind of transitioned into a career for me.
Yeah. Do you remember any fun mods from popular tabletop games?
I think anybody who's into tinkering with popular tabletop games has probably made some kind of variant of Monopoly. So, I mean, they're all over the board. There are a lot of really terrible games. One, I do remember one, though, that was I took a board game adaptation of what was it? Space Invaders. Someone had basically kind of ripped off Space Invaders. And I played it, and I was super disappointed in it because there was absolutely no decisions in the game. You rolled a die, you moved your spaceship to the appropriate column, it shot, you took an asteroid off, an alien, and that was it. There was no decisions at all.
Yeah.
So I was just like, and this is after this, oh my God, I got a brand new game. I'm so excited. So I flipped that one over, and my uncle and I came up with a game about mining asteroids, and that actually served as a spark for another game that I'm working on right now. So.
Oh yeah, which one's that?
Yeah, it's not announced yet, but I'm working on a dexterity game, and so it's been fun to kind of piece some of those things together.
Oh, cool, like a sci-fi dexterity game.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome to hear. Yeah, it's interesting you lament the idea of there being no decisions. Like, maybe it's very basic. I'm sure somebody as smart as you, it's a very basic idea, but it blows the plebeian's mind when somebody like a Sid Meier, who's from, the video game world, Civilization and stuff like that, when he defined a game as a series of interesting decisions. And I was like, oh, that seems good. Is that just obvious to you, or is that a thinker in any way?
I like thinking of games as problems approached playfully, problem solving approach playfully. But I think both of them are really about like you need to think critically about something, and the fun that you derive is about like playing with it. It's like all the fun that you derive from play. But I think I missed the crux of your question. Can you repeat it?
No, that's good. Just that idea of how do you define a game? I think you absolutely nailed it.
Yeah. I think it's really about that playful experience and about overcoming something. So you get that in cooperative games when you're playing against the game, and you get it in competitive games when you're playing against another player.
Yeah. When you're watching people playtest your games, which, I watched a speech of yours from a while ago where even before the pandemic, you're very focused on watching people play and not being in the room because otherwise they'll just focus on you too much. How do you determine whether it's just a fun group versus your game design is that fun? Isn't it tough?
I'll just say it's easier to watch fun groups than it is to watch non-fun groups.
Yeah.
But fun group or not, you can tell when there's tension that's being generated by the game, if people are engaged or not. So you can really kind of basically try to get in tune with people's emotional state as much as I can. And that's easier with cooperative games because people are always talking to each other about what they think they should do. I have a harder time doing that kind of playtesting method with a competitive game because you're like watching someone stare at a board and not say anything. You don't get as much signal from them. But yeah, even with a group that is I don't know. I mean, people come from all different types of backgrounds, so I try to cast a pretty wide net when I'm playtesting, and it doesn't matter what the group is necessarily. If you can sense that feeling of tension that the game is generating emotions amongst the players, then you're in a good spot. Yeah.
Do you ever see any tabletop faux pas in those videos that drive you nuts? Like people checking their phone too much? Like what irritates you the most when you're watching just dozens of people try and play your games?
Well, if they check their phone, then that's a failure on my part.
Interesting. Okay.
I have not made the game suitably and engaging enough. So, if I'm seeing people turn to the rulebook over and over again or checking their phone, that's irritating. But yeah, you see all sorts of different social experiences. So I know that the method is working, that they're less cognizant of being watched when they're doing all sorts of strange social behaviors, whether they're, I don't want to repeat the types of things you see, but
I think you said
it's easy to forget that a camera is running sometimes when it's on your own phone and it's been running for hours and hours. So it just shows that they're less self-conscious about being observed when they're playing.
Yeah, I think in one of your speeches you were talking about people just like, let's just light up a joint, whatever, we're having a good time.
Yeah, that happened quite a while ago. It was before. I didn't know these people at all. It was before legalization. And I was just like, all right, well, clearly they're comfortable and maybe they'll enjoy the game more. I don't know. But yeah, you see all sorts of things.
That's perfect. That must be so bizarre to be a designer. Like I'm thinking about, when I play with my friends, if the designer was watching us play, and it must be so frustrating and bizarre to watch people like read the rules and then be confused about the rules. Because, playing something like a betrayal is always like, okay, I'm reading the rules. Does this apply here? What about this? And like realizing how crucial just that specific wording can be for the rules. Is that the type of thing where you're taking notes and like, okay, if I move this word over there, put a comma in there, it can make or break this experience?
Right. Yeah, you learn all sorts of things. Like you never want to have a negative or a negation in with an or because at least English speakers cannot figure that out. Yeah, I've got big logs of these things, and we're always looking. And I say we because I work with a lot of playtesters. I work with a lot of co-designers when we're
Okay.
playtesting. And yeah, we'll just note tons and tons of stuff. And when you see two groups trip over the same thing, you absolutely have to fix it. But the one thing that this method really teaches you is humility. I mean, you really have to set yourself aside and just actually see objectively this is happening. You can call the players, you can call them out for not being smart or not paying attention. But at the end of the day, it's really your job to make this stuff intuitive. So, yeah, I think humility is the best thing you can bring into the process.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I know you've told the story 300 times, so I apologize. Maybe 4,000, but can you talk about the origins of Pandemic, your game?
Yeah, I really wanted to design a cooperative game. I didn't think co-ops would be fun to play, actually. I thought they were things for kids, like learning experiences, something that you play to teach your kids how to share or whatever when they were young. But I played Reiner Knizia's Lord of the Rings. This is the first co-op game that really grabbed me. And I thought, wow, that was really impressive. I wonder if I could design something like that. So I set out to try designing a cooperative game. I mean, one of the reasons was when I played that with family, it didn't matter if we won or lost. We always enjoyed the game. And that was in stark contrast to some really competitive games or negotiation games where we'd play and, I'd put my heart and soul into it, and then I'd win and the game would be over and I'd feel terrible because,
Right.
Feelings would be hurt so I thought co-op would be great. And at the time, this is in 2004 when I started, not long before SARS had come about and come around, the big epidemic. And pandemics were very much in the news, and it seemed like they would make a great antagonist for a for a cooperative game because I thought no one really roots for disease. Players could all get together, try to solve this big global crisis, and I also thought that disease would be something I could potentially model with a deck of cards. Because, I was kind of into emergent behaviors and that sort of thing. So I just started experimenting and kind of stumbled into some of the central mechanisms through goofing off with a deck of cards.
How do you choose the cities?
It's not an exact process. I took the largest population centers of the world, so like a rank list of cities by population, and then I plotted those out on a map. And you'll quickly realize that most of them are in China and India. And
Sure.
If you want your board to be interesting to some extent, you don't want all the cities are just clustered in this tight little circle. So I just kind of artfully spread them about. So like Sydney is on the map because I wanted the continent of Australia to be present, even though it doesn't have a huge population. And then I just fiddled around with the topology a bit to have interesting spots, some areas that have a pretty tightly knit mesh, and others like Santiago has only got one connection to it, just to give variety to the map.
Yeah. Do you ever hear from the mayors or any sort of people from those cities? Like, how often do people reach out to you like, oh, people are cursing the name of our city because of your game?
I heard from a Berliner who was really confused as why Essen was on the map in Berlin.
Why is that?
And that was just a nod to all the gamers who go to the show there every October. The largest consumer game show in the world is there every October.
Yeah, of course. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Trying to think of other ones. We changed Toronto to Montreal because when Pandemic was bought by another company, their headquarters were in Montreal. So of course they switched that, put themselves on the map. And then poor New Zealand, they're cropped off the map, and I really have to apologize to all of them. We made it up to them in Pandemic Legacy Season 2. But,
good.
I heard just a couple days ago that people are upset they're trimmed off. But I suppose that means that they can't get infected in the game. So
yeah, they're pure over there. The popularity of Pandemic, like what do you attribute that to? Obviously, brilliant game design, but were there certain moments where you realized this thing is hitting a speed boost and gaining more traction? I'm sorry I have to phrase it like this. Like, what caused it to spread the way that it did? Like, what were the big catalysts for the spread of this game?
I'm not sure. I kind of feel like it was the right place at the right time with the right product. There weren't a whole lot of cooperative games out at the time. This is one that you could play in about an hour. Wasn't too hard to learn, and really has a nice emotional journey built into it. So I think it may have taken off because if people are looking for a game that's like the flagship for a genre, they were happy to point to this one. They're happy to point to Pandemic because it's fairly easy to learn, reasonable playtime, and really engage the players. So it may be that as the popularity of the idea of cooperative games grew, more and more people just started pointing to Pandemic.
Yeah, it's interesting. So getting in there early, being brilliant, and being a go-to point, and then as like tabletop gaming really took off, then it was just every time someone made a list about the greatest co-op games of all time or on any site ranked things, and it was always like, well, Pandemic, obviously the best co-op game, and now it's just stuck there forever.
Yeah, I think that's my guess as to why it's really kind of helped ride the wave, because tabletop gaming has grown so much for the past 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And the category has grown a lot. And, the difference between number 1 and 2 may be small in design, but, being number 1 versus number 2 can be a huge advantage.
For sure. What was the most satisfying moment of the entire journey of this thing taking off like it did?
Honestly, the greatest moments of satisfaction I get are when people tell me either, love your game and it brought me into the hobby. And, I've heard that from people who have gone on to become like, minor internet celebrities or all in on games.
Yeah.
To other people who say, hey, thanks for the game. It really brought me closer to my parents, or really, really closer to my spouse. And that really, means a lot when I hear those kinds of stories.
Yeah. Oh, that's super sweet. Was there a moment where you felt like a success? Was that the first moment when that game launched of like, look at this, I can now hold my head up high and walk around the streets? Or what was the moment where you felt like I've made it? I've accomplished everything I could
There's
possibly
been a bunch,
imagine.
and they've been really surreal. It's just sort of like waking dream kind of things, like pinch me. I can't believe that's happening. I mean, when Pandemic Legacy hit number 1 on Board Game Geek, that was pretty magical. And one year going into Spiel in Germany at this big show, they got like a couple 100,000 people. There was a big jumbotron in the center hall, and it just said Pandemic Legacy Season 2. And that was just like, got all tingly, because I didn't even know they had that up there. And I just kind of walked in, and it's just like,
That's bizarre. What was it like working with Davio on the Legacy version?
It was just a joy working with Rob. We've been working together now for like 7 years. And, basically I kind of cold called him out of nowhere. The publisher and I had this idea to do a Legacy version of Pandemic, and I had kind of dismissed it earlier because it seemed like too big a project, and I was working at an internet startup at the time. But I just started sketching one day, filled up a couple pages of a sketchbook, and it wasn't long before I realized, we gotta make this game. This could be really cool.
Yeah.
So I sent him an email, and he basically just wrote back, yes, and this big type. It was very Rob. And we just started working together since.
I'm still fascinated by that Legacy idea. So it's not a brand. It's just Rob Davio is just connected to the concept of Legacy games, and it can be attached to different things. Like, is there any sort of copyright with the Legacy component for tabletop games?
Thank God, no. I mean,
Okay.
He actually made that really clear when he said he used to work at Hasbro, and that's where he came up with the idea of, he applied it to Risk, so we had Risk Legacy, and he went out on his own and did a little bit of homework to make sure that he could pull it off, and was reasonably confident he could, and started working on other titles with that concept and that genre, that play style that's really taken off, and I think it's led to a lot of innovation in the space.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just to go back to the modding days. I mean, I'm sure everybody brings it up too, but do you think a Monopoly Legacy is in the cards? It seems insane that it has not happened yet.
Oh, I don't know. I have no idea what I was playing in that regard. That would be a great question for Rob. As someone who has worked on Monopoly and on, I think he's worked on Monopoly. He's worked on everything.
That seems just absurd. It's right there
Yeah.
with how many different versions there are, all that stuff.
Right.
Do you think that Pandemic Legacy is the way to play, or is there one version of Pandemic that you'd point people towards first?
I mean, one of the things we're trying to do with the line is come up with different titles that other, you know, regardless of your interest, you can find one that works for you. So if you're really into Lovecraft and Cthulhu mythos, we've got Reign of Cthulhu. We've got historical variations. So I mean, the war gamers are attracted to Pandemic: Fall of Rome. If you like dice games, we've got Pandemic: The Cure. What I don't want to do is like repeat myself. So every time we're doing another product, I want to make sure that it fills a niche and it can reach a unique audience. So if you're really into story-driven experiences, the Pandemic Legacy series is great.
Yeah.
Because they really have this epic arc to them.
It's huge. Yeah. So I'm mainly coming from like the video game industry. And so I'm always curious about the rights for these things. Like, do you still own the rights to Pandemic, or with the publishing deal, does the publisher own them, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I own the invention of Pandemic, the design, and then it's licensed to Z-Man. It turns out they're so successful that they'll probably maintain that license for a very long time because they're doing so well with it.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, that's the way I structure everything. It's very much like a book author working with a publisher. So we just license it.
Is there a lot of pressure to like, hey, let's just buy everything out from you?
No, not really. I think everybody wants to make sure that the incentives are all aligned appropriately. So I'm happy. They're happy. I enjoy making new products. They've got demand for them, so it's been a good working relationship.
Yeah. Do you think Pandemic is your best game in terms of design, or is there one that tops it?
Well, I think you could look objectively and say based on sales, it's the best.
Wow, sales!
No, I'm very proud of it. I don't feel like I would go back and change anything in that. We made maybe a couple little tiny tweaks that are almost imperceptible between the first and second editions. So I was very proud of that. I mean, I think Forbidden Island has really held up very well as well. And I've got a very soft spot in my heart for the dice games that I'm working on as well. So it's kind of hard to choose your favorite kid.
Why do you have the soft spot for the dice games? What stands out there?
I just really enjoy two aspects. I really enjoy coming up with games that have a lot of randomness, and yet all the results are good. So it's about your decision making amongst the chaos that the dice create. So I'm talking about like Roll Through the Ages and the Era series that I'm working on now. And then with the new Era games that I'm working on, they really explore this toy-like quality. They're kind of like all the fun that you've got of Lego and other classic games like Cathedral, all kind of put together. So I got a laser cutter a couple years ago, and I've really enjoyed working in 3D. So that's coming through in some of the newer titles I'm working on. And that's something that board games do really well. I mean, the tactile quality, having like toy-like things you can manipulate, that you can get a lot of joy from that sort of thing. So
yeah,
I've been really having a lot of fun with that.
That's awesome. So can you walk us through just like what a day is like for you? How structured do you like to keep things? What motivates you the most? How do you create these things?
Well, I start every morning with a piece of paper. It's got to be college rules, loose leaf with a mechanical pencil, and I just figure out what I'm going to be doing that day. Usually it starts out checking mail, going through some correspondence for about a half an hour or so. And then my day breaks down into either doing design work, watching playtest video, or ideation, or research, I guess. It kind of breaks down into a bunch of different buckets. And I generally I'm working on like 4 to 6 titles at a time, and they're in different stages of development. So I try not to have everything in playtesting or everything in ideation or everything in design, because it gets kind of monotonous, especially if you're watching hour upon hour upon hour upon hour of playtest.
Oh my God, yeah.
Video. So being able to switch between those tasks is really handy, because it keeps you fresh. You can, when you get a little burned out over here, you can switch to a different project, a different task, and work on something else.
That must be tough too, because I imagine there's moments where you're just constantly tempted to jump around so much, but you're never that strict of like, today is all about the dice game, then I'm going to move on tomorrow and make it all about this game.
Yeah, some weeks are like all in. I've got to work on, I've got 3 days. I have to make 2 full, legacy prototypes. Some of these prototypes can take a full day to make, and you just have to get them done. Or I've got this much video and I just have to power through it. And so I'll be on one task for a while. But it is nice being able to switch between them and kind of change gears and keep it fresh.
Yeah. Can you walk me through that ideation phase? What does that look like to you? Is that you bouncing a ball against the wall?
I feel like I know how to design games from, at the point where the idea is solid, like a core game, a core loop is kind of identified, onto, product on the shelf. I feel like I've got that nailed. The whole ideation process where you're taking in all the influences you've ever had in all of your life and all the games you've ever played, and and the design brief you've written for yourself, and you just kind of go and you start tinkering, is the hardest one to kind of nail down. And I think it's because some novelty is required there, and generally that means you're taking the brief, sort of like your goal, your objective for the game with you, and you have something you kind of know, and then there's something you don't know, and you're trying to meld those things together. And I haven't quite figured out how to know the unknowable, so it really, a lot of it, if you want to do discovery and invention, I think there really is just an amount of like reckless experimentation you have to do, and just kind of goof off to some extent.
Yeah.
And like I said, take some walks and try not to stare at the problem directly. Sometimes look at it from the side.
What does the brief look like? Is it co-op game with an Aztec theme, or like what is the outline?
Yeah, it might be.
At?
It might be like that. Generally, it's sort of like for example, it's a cooperative game for 1 to 5 players that plays in 45 to 75 minutes. That retails for $40 to $50. I'm just making that up. But,
sure.
I don't have one in that space, but yeah, it can be that simple. And then you can get a little bit more detailed, like it's an extension of this line, or it should appeal to people who like this kind of game. Generally, in the back of my head, I have some sort of idea for the type of fun that people are going to be, that I want them to have, whether it's like they're doing creative problem solving as a group, or it's more of a Euro game kind of feel where you're developing something over time. So the genre or type of game is generally fairly well understood up ahead of time.
Sure. Do you remember some of your greatest epiphany moments throughout your history? The moments where you said, eureka, watching this old episode of Mary Tyler Moore, I suddenly know how to design this game.
There was one, well, I mean, I guess the big one was playing around with Pandemic and just experimenting with discard pile and deciding to put it on top of the draw pile so that areas of the board would reinfect. That kind of unlocked that whole game for me, and kept me engaged enough to go through the 3 years it took to design and develop that game. I'm faster now, but that was a pretty strong draw and strong hook. I mentioned the dice games, coming up with the idea that every single die side would be really strong, but so that you couldn't roll something bad. It was just a matter of like how you combine them yourself, and understanding that you can have dice games that have a lot of strategic depth and tactical play as well that work. Forbidden Island, looking at that and turning what was supposed to be a card game into a tile game, because it's really hard to pick up a card off a table if there's just one card, and you nick it again and again. So
that's interesting.
What if they're tiles? So
just because
that's just coming to the front of my mind.
That's a fascinating idea. Just you were slightly annoyed by trying to pick up a card. It's like, all right, now it's completely different.
Yeah, and then that just led to a different form factor, and the game kind of developed around that way. But the original brief was it's a cooperative card game.
Yeah. When do you know that something's ready for prototyping? When is it beyond just thinking about these ideas, and now it's like, okay, let's actually try and make something and get some eyeballs on it?
Yeah, it's usually ready long before it's actually hit the table. It should be on the table before I typically have it on the table. I'm working on one right now, in fact, that it's way past time for it to be on the table. I think I've been working on a co-designer on this one, and I think we've been at it for 4 weeks now, and it's not on the table. The longer you wait, the deeper that trough of despair is that you have to crawl out of. The first time it's on the table, it's going to be bad, and the longer you wait, the more time you've wasted just noodling around.
So do you feel like you're just being overly precious of this one, or what is the feeling that's keeping it off the table?
We're trying to model it off some real world stuff, which, I mean, there's some good reasons for that, but at the end of the day, the play is the thing, and if the real world stuff doesn't cut it, then we're going to throw it out. So, we're going a little too long on this.
Yeah, I'd imagine that's a big piece of advice overall for aspiring tabletop designers, is stop thinking about it and get it on the table, get some feedback as early as possible.
Right, right. Yeah. I generally start with a notebook. I'll fill up maybe a page. And then I'm into Adobe Illustrator. And the reason I do it there is because I can change it there so quickly. And one of the most important aspects of the design documentation I'm doing is how quickly can I change it, or how quickly or how badly do I feel if I throw it out? And it's really important that I can change it quickly, and it's really important that I don't feel bad if I have to throw everything away completely.
Yeah. How many scrapped game ideas do you have? How many fragments of ideas are in those, I don't know, the notebooks?
It's not a very deep pool, honestly. And part of it is just because I tend to kill them when they're young. If they can't get to that core game stage where they're baked as an idea that works, then I'll just set them aside. And I don't tend to get very far into the development of those core games unless I have a kind of an idea where I want to go with them. So I think it's probably like a half a dozen of games after pandemic that have not been developed further, that I've made a good, honest start at. Now, before pandemic, it's God, I don't know, dozens, maybe 100 games of varying sizes, and amounts of time that I spent on just lots of little experiments that never went anywhere.
What do you think is, like, why is pandemic kind of that dividing line between formulating ideas versus actually cranking out quality products here?
I feel like I started to kind of know what I was doing right around then, a little bit more. And my motivation for designing this stuff changed a little bit more. I think after pandemic, I was designing things to actually try to bring them on the market at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I kind of knew what was involved with that. Prior to that, it was like, it was just, a fun hobby for one, or, just me fiddling around and not really knowing what I was doing.
Yeah. What were some common mistakes you were making back in the day, design-wise, with those early games?
Well, one big one was, so I was trained as a graphic designer. So all of these projects were excellent opportunities for me to practice my graphic design skills. And so you'd spend all this time in the presentation layer of the game. And so for one game, a racing game, I spent hours and hours painting it in acrylic. And then I got one of the big cameras at the time. I borrowed this high resolution camera from Adobe. It was this top of the line camera, 5 megapixels. Can you believe that?
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. It was amazing, mind blowing. And I took a picture of the canvas and I had to stitch it together. And I spent hours and hours on this, and I put a big layer on top of that. So, 100 hours in, I've got the board done and I print it out. And then, you play it and you're like, oh, I need to make a change. You're like, I'm not going to change that. I spent 100 hours on it. So that was kind of a poster child for that kind of thinking, where you spend all this time investing in the presentation of a game, when really most of the meaningful decisions for how a game will be experienced are at a lower, deeper level. I mean, that stuff's very important, but it should come later in the development process. And if you do it too early, it's a real problem. Okay,
so make it as ugly as possible, get it in front of people as early as possible. Any other advice for aspiring designers out there?
Exactly.
Are there other tips you have for designers?
Oh, I think I mentioned humility. Did I mention humility?
Yeah.
Humility is really important.
And just not telling people they're playing it wrong.
You can love your pet idea, but it really has to hold up on the table. And if people can't understand it or don't enjoy it, then you just have to suck it up and change it.
And that must be so tough to try and figure out, like, when are the playtesters wrong? Well, maybe they're never wrong. It's like, there must be a lot of temptation of just saying, well, this is just a bad group, but if we get the right group, I feel like this will really pop. At what point do you just have to admit defeat and admit that it's on you?
Yeah, pretty early. I think generally speaking, you want to kind of that should be your default position. And if you think otherwise, then show it to another group and then see if you're right. But I think you have to be proven wrong rather than assume you're wrong.
Yeah, gotcha.
Assume they're wrong. Yeah.
What have been some of your favorite tabletop experiences throughout your life, like playing with friends, from your own games or beyond? Are there certain memories that you really cherish for just being like the peak fun you've ever had?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are just hanging out with people at weird times of the day. Just being together for. I just remember a little snapshot or light bulb memories from the past. One was playing War of the Ring, which is a tabletop war game from SPI, when I was a kid with my dad. And I think we got up, it was like Christmas vacation. We were in our pajamas and we started playing this game. And we barely broke to eat. And I think, I don't know, 12 hours later, we're still playing it. We're still in our pajamas. And the game came down to essentially a coin toss at the very end. And, I'm trying to throw the ring into Mount Doom, and he's trying to snatch it. And I think the odds are like 50-50 after all that time.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and so I lost, and I just remember rolling around on the floor. And so memories of that, and sometimes the games that I played, and the big memories are not of really wonderful games. I mean, I remember staying up nearly all night with friends in college playing Talisman, a game that I don't really think terribly highly of, but we had just so much fun playing and being together that it stands out.
Yeah. Do you play a lot of D&D?
I haven't played D&D in quite a while. I played it in high school and a little bit in college, but right now it's mostly a time, factor of time.
Right. It's just a little bit too intense. Do you have
yeah, a little bit.
Do you have suggestions for like below the radar games that you think are excellently designed? Things that have really stood out to you over the last 10 years even?
Let's see. I can just talk about some of my favorite.
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
a big fan of Knizia's stuff. I just love Euro games, and I really have a deep respect of both the breadth of his work and also just the high bar of quality he's got when it comes to.
And what are some of those games then?
Well, one that I've been playing a lot of is Yellow and Yangtze, which is a game where I think you're developing civilizations or developing your people in between the two rivers in China.
Oh, interesting.
And it's a very simple game. You're playing a couple tiles down on the board, but what I like about it, and it's a sort of sibling game, which is called Tigris and Euphrates, is that the rule set's fairly simple, but there's a lot of depth to it, and there's a lot of opportunities for just feeling creative as you're playing.
Yeah.
So he's known for a lot of games where you can only do like one or two things, but there's a big ocean of possibilities to choose from. So you have to plan carefully.
Yeah. Do you who's your favorite designer? Is that it, or who's like the number one tabletop designer that everybody worships at this point?
Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not sure if there's any one. I mean, I do think highly of Knizia. I think Vlada Chvátil from CGE is a maniac and a genius, and I love seeing the kinds of crazy ideas he comes up with. I mean, if nothing else, if you look at just the breadth of the different types of games he's attempted and put together, he did. Let's see. So Galaxy Trucker is this real-time game where you're putting together a spaceship out of like I think it's like sewer pipes. I don't know if you've seen Galaxy Trucker, but he's also done on the other extreme. He's got games like Through the Ages, which is this heavy Euro civilization building game, and then he did Codenames, which is a very light party game, which is extremely popular. So he's touched on all sorts of different types of genres, and I always enjoy seeing what he's got cooking.
Yeah. Do you hang out with a lot of other tabletop designers?
I do. We're kind of I know a bunch of them. We get together at cons, so whenever there's a big convention, it's fun to hang out and say hi to people and have breakfasts.
Yeah. Does it feel, I don't know, creatively fulfilling? Is there a lot of bouncing ideas off? Are you able to go and discuss things at a depth that you aren't able to do with tabletop fans?
No, it's more of just a feeling of camaraderie and
Yeah.
just seeing how people are doing because they're doing similar things to you, and it's just fun to spend some time with people who kind of understand your world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, Matt, anything else you want to talk about? Anything else you want to plug that you're working on here? Or you really would like people out there to check out?
Well, I've got an expansion for that Era game I had mentioned is coming out in August, and so that's got these 3D figures. So there's bridges and rivers and all these things to make a medieval city come alive, and it's got some of the nicest table presence of any game I've ever seen. So check that out. That's called Era. There is a new game that's coming out. I believe it's next month, called Pandemic Hot Zone. It's set in North America, so very timely right now.
Interesting.
It's kind of a lightweight demo version of Pandemic. So it plays faster. Everything's kind of scaled down. So the price point's about half. The play length is about half. And you can get into the game and get up and running really quickly. So if you're interested in checking out Pandemic for the first time, that's a great way to introduce the game to someone or try it out yourself.
Yeah.
And then finally, Pandemic Legacies, the third installment is coming up later this year, so keep an eye out for that.
And that's still on schedule?
Well, it's on schedule for this year. I don't have a date.
Okay.
But yeah, it's on schedule for this year. I can say sometime in this calendar year it will be released.
Awesome. Well, hey, Matt, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, take care. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. The Deepest Dive is the best, most thorough discussions about games on the internet. Prove us wrong, please. The MinnMax Show podcast airs every Thursday. Patreon supporters vote on what we stream every single week, and a whole lot more. Give us a shot, try subscribing to the YouTube channel, and we hope we can win you over.